Oh, you, Paul. No, me first.
Oh, it's all you.
Yeah.
Wait.
Good evening. This is the final report and meeting on the Brigham Academy Reimagined Planning Grant. Brigham Academy, as most of you are already aware, was built in 1897 and closed 1987 thereabouts, and was in operation for 100 years. Our families have been there. A lot of us went there for grade school. Some people might have gone for high school. But it's a building that means a lot to us. It is in the center of our town. It's on our welcome signs at the entrance of the village area, the town area. And for the last 40 years or so, people have been trying to find a use for the building. And I'm afraid that if we don't do something soon, we're going to lose the opportunity to use it at all. So 3.5 years ago or so, I was approached by Franklin County Northwest Regional Planning Commission and asked if we wanted to participate in a planning grant. In that planning grant, monies were funded for a feasibility study. There's a copy of it out in the hall. Doug Kennedy created that. A lot of people have been involved. Tim Smith has been involved. I was surprised to look back, but he's been helping for 10 years. Northwest Regional Planning Commission, almost as long. Paul Dreyer Design, has probably spent twice as many hours as he's built a town for. And he has done a labor of love in trying to find answers for us. He's been quite creative. And I don't think we've gotten this far without Paul. Also without Kathy Lavoie from the Northwest Regional Planning Commission, Tim Smith from Franklin County Industrial Development Corp, and many, many other people. This is just the planning stage. We have ideas of how it best should be used. We have ideas about how we wanted it to be used. Those ideas, unfortunately, aren't financially feasible. Whatever we do with the building, it has to support itself. Otherwise, it's going to become a burden to the taxpayers. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Paul Dreyer of Dreyer Design. And he has a presentation for us this evening. And afterwards, Kathy Lavoie will be available, as with myself and Paul, for questions. Paul?
Thank you, Lance. Good evening, everyone. And I think the one person who is not mentioned in all the work that's been done is Lance. Without Lance, I called Lance before the pandemic and started this conversation from my perspective. And I've been working on it since late 2019, early 2020. And it is a labor of love. I love the building, and my children love the building. And I will say, I think that we have made some, as a team, made some great progress in getting a direction for the building that might satisfy some of the community's needs and also housing needs within the region. So with that said, I will say that what started the project from my side of the world was that we looked at it and thought it could be a great housing opportunity for Bakersfield and for the region at large. So that was the first question I had, and I called Tim Smith back in 2019 and said, Tim, can you help out with this project? And I called Preservation Trust of Vermont also, and both were very encouraging and provided some assistance to get us going. So here we are. Here we are. This is a synopsis of our planning grant, and we hopefully will get on to some kind of implementation of the end results of this planning grant, which, spoiler alert, they're very positive. So in 2021, the town of Bakersfield did apply for a community development block grant. It was provided, it was for the purpose of the grant was to provide, to evaluate preservation of Brigham Academy. We did not want to know what the uses would be in there. We just wanted to know, is it possible to preserve this? And if so, what could uses be? So we wanted to explore the alternatives for reuse and the economic impacts of preserving and revitalizing the structure. And I think our general sense was that if we could preserve the building and reuse the building, that it was our sense, my side's sense, and I think Lance and Kathy and Tim of Franklin County Industrial Development Corporation, that if the building could be preserved and reused, it would have enormous ripple effects for the community of Bakersfield and the surrounding regions. So our goals were to identify potential uses of the Brigham Academy. We did an in-depth study to, which is, again, Lance mentioned it, it's in the hall outside. We wanted to look at the structure to make sure it was structurally adequate. We wanted to look at site capacity. What could the site handle in terms of septic water? Well, we have town water, but in terms of septic, what requirements from the Vermont Department of Historic Preservation would be imposed? Number one. Number two, how would that impact tax credits for potential development? My job in this all was to look at architectural capacity and look at the building itself as an architectural artifact. And then we thought we would like to identify partnerships to figure out how to move forward. Because we knew that, well, I knew that I was not going to develop the building into something else, and we needed to find ways to get it to move forward. So the last thing we wanted to do was figure out how that would happen, whether it's grants or whether it's at that point we were thinking potentially private investment, and still thinking that, or there's a project in Hardwick, Vermont called the Yellow Barn Project, and it is a mix of both private investment and public funding sources, and there's obviously private spaces and public spaces. So from early on, we talked about that as a model for how Brigham might evolve into its next phase. So I'm just going to tell you about some of the results. The market study is available. It concluded that it would be best repurposed for market rate one and two bedroom senior apartments, or I don't know how to put this other than probably not small family or people with children. I have children, and I know the impacts of children on a building. So the idea would be that it would be either younger people who are just starting out in their professional career, or older people that have smaller sized apartment needs. Then we concluded the conclusion was additional potential spaces or public spaces could be the town library, a community center, kitchen, a community space, or a community kind of a space where you guys or the community can meet for whether it be potlucks or town meeting day, any kind of events like that. So the other thing in this page, we look at the civil engineering. The report is also available in the town offices. Trudell Consulting Engineers completed 4 test pits, and an in-depth soil analysis was performed. The conclusion is the site capacity is sufficient to support the uses of the market study. So the market study came up with the idea of about 24 potential units, residential units, and some community or community type spaces, and the potential wastewater capacity within the site in terms of a leach field, and then septic and leach was there. So it's, in short, we're in good shape for what we would envision being there in terms of the market study. Structural engineering. This is a little more, I wouldn't say dicey, but I would say that it's, the building's old, and we have different loading requirements than we did. Then actually there was probably no loading requirements when the building was built. So there would need to be some minor reinforcements to get to the residential use. To get to what we'll call the auditorium spaces, or a loading that is more public amenity use, like a library or any of those things, there would need to be some more significant reinforcement. However, according to my engineer, who I trust, or our engineer, who's quite good, we could achieve that with work. I mean, everything in this building is gonna take work. So the capacity to reinforce the building to take the live loads required to have community spaces or gathering spaces is absolutely viable within the building. From the architectural point of view, we've done drawings that show that we can get minimally 24 units in there. That if we had 1 parking space per unit plus 1 parking space for every unit staff, that's a bit of a challenge, but I think we can achieve it if, well, I think there's going to have to be some discussion within the community about where there's land available, if there's parking that is remote and maybe some shuttle service, or if there's other land that is accessible nearby that might house some of the parking. So again, I think the existing structure has plenty capacity for the unit number, and this is something that I'll come up to next, but because of requirements from Department of Historic Preservation, we will need to preserve some of the spaces as they are. And I'm guessing you guys know which spaces they might be, but and they would provide for the assembly space or the community gathering spaces. So as far as historic tax preservation credits go, this is part of the historic preservation. I think, and Kathy, kick me under the table if I'm wrong, but I think we have potentially a developer who's on board, and they would get the tax credits, and they would complete that part of the assessment of the project. And in other words, they would go to the National Park Service and see what the requirements were from the National Park Service for preserved spaces and historic preservation in order to ensure tax credits, which really does a huge amount in terms of ameliorating development costs. As far as identifying strategic partnerships, those we've been working with Northwestern Regional Planning Commission. and the Franklin County Industrial Development Corporation and Preservation Trust. And again, a potential private developer is engaged. We've just actually 2 weeks ago or a week ago applied for a grant from Preservation Trust for the building that would finance or it's a community, it's a village preservation or restoration initiative program that Preservation Trust has. And if you develop community space within your village, it's the idea is to preserve the village. They will pay for a huge amount of it. They're awarding 7 grants this year, and I think I've got my fingers crossed that this building is a very good. I think it's a very likely candidate for their program. Not just this building, but Bakersfield, the town. So we have looked at funding sources. We have the tax credits. We have Efficiency Vermont rebates and credits. When I redrew the building or drew the building, and my architectural leanings wanted to make the building as tight an envelope or as the beauty of Brigham Academy is it's an existing building, so it's there. So we have essentially a shell and some interior space. It's there. Now, when we go in and do or somebody goes in and does some work, they can make that shell, because it's existing, super efficient in terms of energy usage and I wouldn't say a green building, but there are things that they can do to make it a more efficient building than the house I live in, which is a 1910 house that has 0 insulation in the walls. So I think Efficiency Vermont will help you, or help the community, and they have fairly large incentives to sort of dole out in terms of what you do to make that building more efficient. There's Community Development Block Grant Implementation Grant, which I think the developer who may be involved is open to. Vermont Housing Conservation Board, which is also known as VHCB, they have, if you listen to anything coming out of Montpelier, housing is a priority for the state, and there's money from the federal level down being dedicated to housing, and housing in your region is an imperative. So there's HUD and Federal Housing Association Section 232 loans, which are I actually can't remember what 232 loans are, but I know that I don't know if they're low interest or no interest loans, but they're loans that would make the building more viable. Yeah, here it is, Preservation Trust Village Revitalization Initiative. They received, vis-a-vis Patrick Leahy, a huge endowment of money to, this year it's $10 million. I think every year it's $10 million, and they pick 7 projects to be per year approximately to divvy up that $10 million. And then low income tax credits, which if the housing meets the low income standard, which is not as onerous as it sounds, because it doesn't necessarily mean you're renting to low income people. It means that the rent is 30% below area median income, which in Bakersfield, you're in a region that rents at a very high rate. So I'm sure that most things it works this way in Newport too. Most things in Newport are, even market rate houses are automatically 30% below area median income. So it's effectively market rate for Newport, where I'm from. It would be effectively market rate for Bakersfield, but for the St. Albans watershed, it would look like low income rents. I hope that makes sense. So So some more about the potential funding sources. There's USDA Rural Development Community Facilities and Housing Grants, which are amazing. They can fund massive amounts of a project. State water and wastewater revolving loan funds, which would take care of all the sort of septic design and also implementation. There's also a Vermont Community Loan Fund, Champlain Housing Trust Loan Fund. The team has talked about the Northern Borders Regional Commission grants. We again have the public-private partnership with a potential developer. There's new market tax credits, which are hard to explain, but it's a way of, again, taking down soft costs and bringing the overall cost of development down. There's designated village incentives, Act 250 relief. So if you're all a designated village, you would have that capacity to not have the soft costs of Act 250 or any of the soft costs associated with permitting at the state level. And then I think Franklin County Industrial Development Corporation would also be a resource. And one that is not mentioned here, but I think would come into play is, and I don't know, Kathy would know if the state passed, they have a per unit development fund that is quite extensive, and it would provide a huge amount of money for a project such as this in terms of per units developed. And so I think there's lots of potential money sources that are not just coming out of a developer's pocket, I mean, and which do not necessarily have a return on investment for. So really, that's the big thing that I kept saying from the beginning, is that what is going to make Brigham Academy work is there's got to be a whole host of monies. Some come from private development, but a whole bunch of them come from sources that may or may not need to be repaid. Some will be repaid. For example, the state of the wastewater and water and wastewater revolving loan funds have a negative interest, which essentially means, you're not paying the loan back. So it's a loan, but they don't require you end up not paying it back. So I think that was the whole idea, is that we could pull together a whole bunch of funding sources that would combine with private funding to make it viable for a private developer. So I think what I would conclude, and I think we as a team concluded, is that Brigham should move forward. The potential for housing and community facilities, everything fits in. The building can handle it. The funding sources are there, and I think the community, from the Doug Kennedy study forward, is amenable, generally speaking, to the idea. And I think in general, our conclusion is that the findings are positive, that there's no real impediments to stopping the redevelopment of Brigham Academy into something that is, once again, iconic and central to your community, not only as a building, but as a place. And as a place for human interaction and just lively. I can imagine that lawn again being it's very prominent now physically, but as a place where people gather and kids are meeting with their families or all kinds of things. So for us, the next steps are the ownership model. And I think that while this might be a slightly more difficult discussion, there may be some ownership model where it's partly owned by some kind of 501c3 or something like that through the town that would hold the community space, or the town holds the community space as its own ownership, and then the condos or the apartment units are privately held, so that there might be a private-public partnership, which also brings into question the maintenance model. Who's maintaining grounds? How's that done? Is it done like a condo association where everybody pays in condo fees and then the fees pay for road, lawn, parking lot maintenance? Again, we'll come to parking needs. The parking needs, I think that we will need to look at finding some additional land within very close range to get to that one parking space per unit, which is not a lot of parking spaces, plus one for every 4 employee or visitor. So, you're looking at, I don't know, 30 or 35, 32 spaces. And then start date, if the developer is in fact going to move forward, we need to you need to, not me, as a community, sort of hone in on when this can all start to happen. So with that, I will entertain some questions. Pardon me, didn't mean to go back to goals. So questions.
Alice.
Just to start where we finish.
Would you please come up to the microphone so
Yeah.
we can, would you?
He's not gonna hear you.
What?
Hit the button until the light turns bright green. Says push, hit the button that says push.
Oh, bright green, bright green. Okay. My question was, would the developer be in charge of hunting down all that money and taking care of all those grants, or?
It would have to be a joint project dependent on who owns it.
So maybe,
And I think I didn't catch your name, but I think that if you, for example, so I've used many of these funding sources in other projects before. I'm familiar with them, but if you, for example, went first to community development block grant implementation phase, part of that implementation phase could say, we want to hire a consultant to do that piece of the puzzle for us. So Vermont Housing Conservation Board also has a grant program that provides a consultant for specific needs. So they could help you tailor or start to tailor your funding source acquisition. So I think that that's all. And quite honestly, the developer, I've spoken with the developer on multiple occasions. I think that they have it's in their best interest to have their hands on that as well, because they're, every single extra dollar or dollar that they can secure that is not coming out of their pocket is, if they have to hire a consultant to do it, it's money well spent. So I think that I guess what I'm getting at is, I don't think it's going to be incumbent on the community to find those extra dollars or those other funding sources. I think there's ways to get there without burdening. I mean, what would likely happen is the board would have to approve some of them, like the Northern Borders Regional Planning Commission grants need to have community endorsement, and that's a yes or no from a meeting like this. So that would be I would think the far end of what you would have to do as a community.
Do you want to bring Kathy up so she can sit?
Kathy,
If you want to come up around here and sit, and I'll make life easier. But sorry, 1 minute, Paul. We're just organizing. Paul, if you could stop sharing your screen so that people could see you better. That way it'll make the images larger too, please.
Sure.
Thank you.
Just to add to what Paul said, I did last week, along with FCIDC, meet with a potential developer that had come here to a select board meeting a month and a half ago. And one of the first things that I did was to hold a potential funders meeting when I wrote the planning grant. And the next step that I'll be suggesting is that we hold another potential funders meeting, because there's just a whole host of entities out there that will help you find money, but there's a lot of work to do that. And of course, every grant and any funding stream usually has some sort of items that they need as well within the confines. So you have a Northern Borders grant. A lot of that depends on the ownership, whether or not that money is available. USDA has requirements. So it's not just a matter of a lineup of funds. It's a matter of how you knit those funds together to accomplish the project that you want. And it's a lot of work. The resources for that type of work would come out of Northwest Regional Planning Commission. I plan to continue on and work in that capacity, come along with Tim Smith's office, FCIDC, as well as, of course, whoever the potential developer is. So, but yes, that would be something that the potential owner would be involved with, but also the community.
Just real quick, can you introduce yourself, please?
I'm sorry, Kathy Lavoie, Northwest Regional Planning Commission. And as I said, I wrote the planning grant along with the rest of the team, and hope to stay on.
I apologize for that.
That's all right. No
One
problem.
more piece of housekeeping. When you come up to ask questions, if you could state your name for the record, please, that would be great. Appreciate it.
And I would like to add that I'm pretty committed to the project, and I don't think that the potential developer is going to ask me to be the architect, but I'm committed to helping the community out in ways that I can. And so when Kathy and I endeavored to write the planning grant together, that was essentially not volunteer work, because I thought we would get the grant, but I'm willing to. It is truly a labor of love for me. I really enjoy the project, and I wouldn't be here today if it was something I was not interested in. And I think as important as my interests, what we found is that across the board, when we bring up the project anywhere in any agency level, the state of Vermont, HUD, the people are interested in this building, number one. Number two, the idea of housing in this building.
Sharon Lawyer. I have the utmost confidence in you folks finding the money. I'm stepping back for a minute as a person that works and lives in the community, and I am very worried that we have such a small turnout, people that didn't realize this was happening. And I think I'm excited that so much is happening to go forward, but we have to make sure that the community of Bakersfield is working with not having it being done to the people of Bakersfield, because I think we got a sense of that on town meeting day. And I think people are scared about something that will change and impact things in a negative way. I don't believe that at all. I mean, I'm all for this happening. I fielded a lot of calls from you folks at our house. I know the amount of time everybody's put in. I know you do great work, but I work at the school. Folks at the school had no idea this was happening. You know, ball games are happening, plays are happening. Because I assume at some point you want the approval of the community. Or maybe you don't. Maybe that's not necessary. I don't know. And if it's not something you want to share at this point, that's fine.
What else can we do? It's posted all over the place. We took out an ad for a month in the Messenger. It's on Facebook. People have been talking about it for months.
So it was on Facebook.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I actually responded with the date and the time in our both local Bakersfield community groups.
I mean, I would say we could have put it in our school newsletter, but I've put other things in the letter in the past, and I don't think, we would have had crowds. I don't know, but I worry how perception, I guess that's what I'm thinking about.
The one good thing is it's being recorded and it'll be put up on the YouTube channel underneath its own header as Brigham Academy meeting, informational meeting, and people can watch it. I'm sure if a question comes up after they watch it, I'm sure that, someone from the team will be more than happy to try to answer said question. But as you said, I expected a bigger turnout, if not physically here, at least on Zoom and.
I am disappointed. Thank you very much for the people who did show up. I appreciate your presence very much, but I am
Is it?
very disappointed for the low turnout.
Is it something that will have to come back to the voters? Because I feel like, how do you move ahead? I mean, you've got, as you say, somebody interested. How long do they stay interested? I know this all started before COVID.
Well, let me just chime in. For the most part, the Board of Aldermen can approve or disapprove grants or funding mechanisms that are public funding mechanisms, independent of the voting community. The developer, if he buys the building, can do what he wants, he or she, pardon me. So one of the things I found really fascinating when we show up, I usually come to town with more than one person, is whether it be the civil engineers doing test pits or me and the structural engineer, or me and the civil engineers, or whoever it is. People come out and say, wait, what are you doing here? They're always curious about why we're there. We did have a community walkthrough of the building. I don't remember how long ago, but we had a really nice turnout then. So I think when there's a notice of activity, flurry of activity around the building, even if it's minimal, the community seems to show up and ask questions. So I think as stuff moves forward, a lot of questions will get answered in that capacity, and questions will be asked too of the board. So I think that in my experience with community development work, that word does spread, and while there might not be a great turnout tonight, as things progress and an excavator shows up on site to do some other kind of test pit or something, people will start to ask questions, and we have a good amount of answers at this point, and we will get more answers as we move forward.
Yeah.
Chris Bell.
Toward the end of your presentation, you're talking about parking. I know this is going to be early on in this whole.
We have been offered a half-acre lot adjacent to Brigham, right across the avenue, right across Brigham Lane. There's an empty lot there. We have been offered that. The owner is holding that for us until we make a decision. So we do have an alternative.
And that would hold about those 30 some odd.
Yes.
Spots.
Yes. So good question,
Okay.
but the issue with that is funding it. The owner has offered it for sale or lease, being very generous.
Thank you.
Brad Alexander. I have a couple questions with looking at your initial layout plan. You were talking about 24 units.
Originally, we're talking 24 units, because of restrictions from the Historic Preservation Trust, for one, the national parks was another one that had restrictions. They wanted certain areas kept at the very least reclaimable for the future. So it's limiting how many units we can put in. So yes, that sketch
Shows 16.
preliminary idea of what could be put in there shows only 16 units.
And just to be clear on that, and what that affects, of course, is both the state and federal tax credits that would be allowed. So with the 16 to 17 units, they're thinking somewhere around $800,000 in tax credits, combined tax credits. So it does make a substantial difference, you know.
Yeah,
financially as
so
well.
they're saving what is the gymnasium area as something that they.
No, the gymnasium area, is, if you look carefully, is multi-level units.
Oh,
The
so
upstairs auditorium would be one large apartment. And the south stairway, a proposed possibility was a multi-level unit that incorporated the stairs. Wouldn't be my kind of house or my kind of apartment, but a multi-level unit that incorporated the stairs so that by simply taking down a couple walls, you could reclaim
in the future.
the stairway in the future.
Okay. The other thing I don't see on here, and if you're talking senior housing, I'm surprised, is an elevator. Is there no, I mean, an elevator's a big bite, so no elevator for,
That was considered, but there were enough ground accessible units to meet the minimum requirements.
that's
So, and I will say that those are drawings that originally, the original study, architectural study had an elevator and had the 24 units. But I think that's been revised by the developer.
You can say the name.
Jim Camp, yeah.
You can say the name, Jim Cameron. Jim Cameron is the potential developer, and he has put in quite a bit of his own time and money to look at this project, and he is considering it.
and now I probably know less about this building than most of the people in this room. But its historical ties to Brigham and Women's Hospital, I think, are really unique. And I actually reached out to the historical people down at Brigham and Women's to ask some questions, but is there any talk about maybe taking one of these spaces where you're proposing senior housing and potentially doing a connection with them in some sort of medical offering, you know, a rural medicine type of place within this building that's meeting some community needs, something a little bit closer by? You got a big space and a building that's otherwise housing.
For instance, a visiting nurse's office, something along those
Something
lines.
along those lines that might tie your historical knot back with them, and wondering if maybe
Absolutely.
funding from somebody like them is a
Just-
possibility.
We're just brainstorming at this stage. Okay, we're trying to figure out what we can and can't do with the restrictions and still have it as a standalone project where when you're all done and the contractor walks out, it pays for itself.
Right.
I always thought myself that a sundry store or something for the elderly, so they don't have to travel to go get toilet paper or, you know, hey, coffee, whatever in the morning. I always thought a little store in there would be great, like on the first floor, so that, you know, you could help serve them better, with the day-to-day needs.
Yeah.
Was another thought I had.
Absolutely.
Excellent suggestion.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Linda McCall. And now that we're brainstorming, have you considered a space in there for the post office? Current post office is too small for its space. They have that satellite unit of boxes. out in the lobby, and you're gonna be adding more rental units that are gonna be in an area where they have to use a post office. Current post office, I think they pay a rent equivalent to a one-bedroom apartment.
Wow.
And the parking that they have there now is difficult for people to get in and out of with the
Mhm.
curbing that was put in.
Yeah,
So it would be,
I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah.
That's something to consider, yeah.
okay,
The old kitchen would be the perfect spot for that.
that's what I thought. Okay,
And that would take up, yeah. Yeah,
that's the thought. Thank you.
And just to clarify too, I don't, it's not necessary that it be elderly housing. There's nothing that mandates that. It's more around the size, limitations and what that might attract. It might be elderly and, or a young person.
if we did put in 100% elderly housing units, then we would have to have the elevator. And that's a $500,000 investment.
I think the thrust behind elderly housing was really that you don't want to. I mean, I'm talking about myself, because I have an 11 and a 9-year-old child. You don't want a family with small children in a building that's 40,000 square feet with other. I mean, it's 2 children in a family they generate noise. We have an activity level that is not necessarily amenable to or compatible with a single person, or maybe one elderly, maybe someone who's 25 who hasn't gotten married yet, who works in St. Albans or wherever. So the idea would be that they would be either single or a couple without. I think what the thrust was not to have family housing, if that makes sense. And I can tell you that, and any of you have, probably most of you have had children, know what families are like. They're noisy, they're fun, but they're also slightly destructive and everything else. So they have higher maintenance costs. So that was the idea behind saying elderly, but the real thrust was in a polite way to not say not family housing. Yeah.
And as well, some of the funding that might be available could be found through state agencies and partners that do selectively senior housing. So that limits you in some ways, but it also may bring in a partner that's wholly interested in senior housing, and they're out there, somebody like Cathedral Square or so forth. But it doesn't need to be, of course. Elevators also, there are some funding streams out there for elevators. I know that Jim is looking into what some of those funding streams would be. A clarification to Paul mentioned what is called the VHIP money, Vermont Housing Money. It is $30,000 per unit. And with the prices of that median income and the way that works, I mean, an individual could be making some fairly decent, substantial money and still be eligible.
Do you know if they passed the increase on?
They did not pass the
They did not.
increase. It's still 30 for a 1-bedroom and it's 50 for a 2 to 3 bedroom. There were some other changes that made it easier for developers, though. Well, you do, that's right. And they have an entity which happens to be CVOEO that is involved in that. Right. But there, again, I think there were some changes as well. Again, we're still trying to understand all of the changes, but there were some changes as well along that process in which the individuals are chosen and all of that.
You talking about income level, the 30 and the 50?
No, that is per unit of money that you can get towards 30,000 towards a unit.
And I assume senior housing is like 55 and up?
Yes, I believe it is. Yeah.
I just want to clarify.
If nothing's changed, they keep creeping down. As I get older,
What about the fair housing? Are you allowed to not have families in there if you don't designate it for 55 and over?
Yeah,
I don't think you can discriminate if a family has children, that you can't not rent to them because they have children, unless it's completely designated 55 and over. That's the only exception.
Well, I think the way around that is not, if you're primarily creating a one-bedroom stock, no family's gonna rent you're eliminating, not by saying we're not gonna rent to families, but by the unit type, you're gonna eliminate a whole large section of potential renters. So the unit type allows for the number of units. The bigger the unit type, 2 bedrooms take up more square footage than a 1 bedroom. And you can do the math. And so for the Jim Cameron to get the number of units in there to have a ROI, he needs to maximize the units, which would imply 1 bedrooms or 1 bedrooms with an extra small common space or something like that. And that was our approach when my team did an initial design for it as well.
But you could have a single parent with one child, that's still 2 people. And that child could be 4 and it could be hyper.
No, I understand that, but honestly, I'm a single dad and I have 2 children. Even if I had 1 children, I could not live in a 1 bedroom with my 1 child. It would not, I would not be on this phone call right now. I'd be in bed. So, you know, it's not a viable thing to think that, at what would be called Bakersfield market rate apartments, maybe 30% AMI or low income apartments. It would not be reasonable to think that a single parent with 1 child could live, I don't think, in a 1 bedroom apartment.
I have over the years dealt with families in that situation.
I can see that, like a mother dot. I mean, if you're
Please, if you're going to speak, identify yourself and come to the microphone, and that goes for the secretary as well.
I've got mic. I got my mic on.
Identify yourself.
Tammy Brennan.
There you go. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I've been involved with a lot of homes over 40 years, and I have been in some of those places, so I don't want to naysay something, but I want to be cautious. We are next to a school. We have families less in Bakersfield than in other communities in Franklin Northeast, but in some pretty dire situations. I mean, when I started in '83, it was very eye-opening as somebody who was just starting out. And I don't want there to be bad feelings. I like the size of the apartment, the senior.
And to be clear, the market analysis did say that they felt the draw for the seniors would be there, that they could be solely senior housing. And again, as part of your comments earlier, that should be a community discussion.
I remember at the initial meetings, member meetings, we had those 2 ladies from Williston that wanted senior housing, and they wanted to be on the list back then. That you have, speaking of kids, the school is adjacent. Just we didn't notice. And I love the idea of preserving some community space. And I haven't looked at the drawings, but I know the Historical Society has a kitchen. We have lots of places in the village. It feels like that we can gather. The church here. The school does not have enough space. So I don't know if there's some way to preserve or thinking that preserving some sort of community space that the school could access, whether it's in an after-school program or et cetera.
That has been discussed. The downstairs, what used to be the study hall, It was a cafeteria, study hall, wherever, and it is a large community space. One of the possible uses that has been discussed is a daycare, room for a daycare or after-school program.
Are you worried about the elderly? You're putting a daycare
That's
downstairs.
this is just a discussion, folks. This is just a discussion stage.
Yeah.
No decisions have been made. Your input is greatly appreciated, but it's not the time to get emotional about it because we haven't made any decisions about what it's going to be yet. We've got ideas, but we're limited by what we can get from funding, from who, and what their restrictions are. Vermont Preservation Trust already put well over $100,000 into the roof,
Wow.
but they've got they got their fingers into us for that. So they insist on having a say.
Brad Alexander, I have a couple two-part question. The feasibility study, as you said, was aimed more at seniors and senior housing,
Mhm.
which it showed what, matter of less than 6 months at full capacity, I think is what it was.
Mhm.
That being said, is there a final, have you estimated any kind of property tax that when that, and if that building came to completion, that the owner and or co-owners would be responsible for?
Haven't gotten that far yet.
Because I'm thinking with the way that you guys have that built, as far as the town of Bakersfield is concerned, if you could bring your seniors from some of your, houses that are in the area that are your 3 and 4 bedrooms that are only
Yep.
being used by one person, then you're gonna bring in families to fill those homes, bring those homes up to, potentially restoring those homes as well, bringing their market value up. And this over here is going to be brought up to value, if there's any kind of tax incentive for the
At
end.
some point, we did discuss a tax break for a certain time period for whoever took on the project. It was mentioned, fine details were not discussed. So it's negotiable, yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
Lance, if people watch the video and they have a question, who should they present them to?
Well, they should present them to me and I will decide whether I can answer it or I have to involve Kathy or Jim or Paul or Tim or whoever.
Should they be funneling them through the town clerk's office? Or
Please have them sent to the town email.
townofbakersfield@gmail.com.
Thank
That's
you.
the select board email. And so it would go right to you.
I would be the simplest.
Thank you.
I dread the thought of having dozens of people calling me at home, so.
Have been in any conversation with the school about swapping parking in some way?
No, I don't think it's going to be required. The school during the day is full. Nighttime parking would be no problem, but during the day, there isn't room for much else. And, we're looking for somewhere around 30 parking spots. There is room on the south end where beside where the kitchen is for visitor parking. But long-term parking for residents would work perfect with the lot across the road. So.
I'd like to thank all of you for all your efforts over the years. And your continued efforts. And hopefully we can bring this project to a close and implement it.
It is my hope that we can move forward with this. I would love to see more community support.
Standing for, if you type cake or ice cream, something like that, you got one. Oh, yeah.
Linda, you started with cupcakes.
We will be closing out the planning grant by the end of June, actually, hopefully, by the third week in June, because I'm headed on vacation for a week at the end of June, but we'll be closing out the planning grant. And then but we haven't been sitting still, as you can see, we're already talking about other fundings, other grants, all of that. So, but this grant that, this public engagement is a requirement for, will be closed by the end of the month.
Excellent.
If we go the grant route, the next big step would be a large implementation grant.
That would be up to $1 million.
Yep. $1 million, $800,000 in tax credits. A little bit here, a little bit there.
30,000 per unit. It starts to add up.
Yep.
I have one question, John West. Paul, or anybody, do we have an estimate of what it would take to take the building from where it is today to where
Yes.
we're thinking? And what would that estimate be?
Jim Cameron, I think, as he announced at the select board meeting, estimates around 3.5 million. But he is working that budget, and I can't, as Lance said, I want to officially, I mean, he is doing all of this in kind. This is work that he's doing.
Yeah.
Because he has an interest and a love for the building, has done several projects like this. And but if he can't make the numbers work, it will be very, very difficult for anybody else to make them work.
If you know Jim Cameron, this type of job is his specialty. He takes old buildings and he breathes new life into them. So,
And he's pretty conservative too on him, as far as management or management cost and profit and all of that. So.
Got to follow directions this time. I just want to say, and I was just doing the numbers in my head, in 1998, when the school did a project with Brigham, thinking that, you're laughing, 1 million. So to me, 3 million, 26 years later, does not seem that bad. What's that?
3.5.
3.5. Well, but I mean, that was 26 years ago.
Is your mic on?
Yes, it's right there.
Just checking.
It is. You can't hear me?
I hear you talking. I don't have a problem with that.
Okay. Well, anyways, the number stuck with me because I remember before it got voted down, it was just
Yeah.
around 1 million. Didn't need it for school, but would have been handy for something.
absolutely.
Just one.
I think what you said about the Preservation Trust needing to be involved could actually really work to the benefit of the whole project. Because what Sharon said earlier about people, I think it was Sharon, about people being afraid of change. You can say, well, we're required to stay within these the parameters of the Preservation Trust. And so I think that can really.
You want to talk about change? Let's put it off a few more years and there'll be nothing down there because we'll be forced to tear it down.
Well, most of this I'm saying is that it'll be great to.
Probably.
Message for the community.
No, absolutely, Rachel.
Yeah. Thank you very much for attending this meeting tonight. I hope you all have a great evening. Enjoy the weather while you can.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Paul. You have a good evening, bud.
You too. Thank you.